Hello, I have just read chapter 7 of Coruscant Nights, Jedi Twilight. Now I'm gonna have to say I'm so sorry if this video comes out before my review on 5 and 6, chapters 5 and 6. Just because this is going to be in a separate video from that and I haven't started uploading 5 and 6 yet. So this one may come out before 5 and 6 just because it's maybe shorter or longer, we'll see. Um, So we're picking back up with Nick Rostu, and he's looking for Jack's Pavan. And I'm really happy this chapter has strayed away from giving us background on the characters. It just was straight plot. There was nothing telling us about what the history of the characters have been. So far, the best chapters have been this chapter and chapter 3. And it mainly just comes down to the fact that we're not getting history dumps on the characters and the places. There were bits of the history in here of Coruscant and stuff, but it was done in such a way where it was actually interesting. We were told about how Nick's been making his way to what was it, Amtor Avenue, was it? Yeah, Amtor and a view and to the Coruscant Arms, which is where Jack, which if I remember correctly, is where Jack sees. Uh, yeah, the Coruscant Arms. That's where Jack sees. Um, Again, there's not really a whole lot to talk about in this chapter, but it's quite interesting to hear more about the underworld on Coruscant. Um, to see more just, the lower levels. Against something I said in the first chapter, um, in my review of chapter 1, was that I really do like we're going back into the underworld, because having read The Last of the Jedi, the third book in that series takes us even below the surface of Coruscant. And so it's really nice to kind of see more of Coruscant, and it's really nice to kind of see different areas. In Last of the Jedi Underworld, everything seemed in disrepair. It seemed very bare and empty, and not many people there anymore. There was that hotel that they were able to stay at for the night. Um, and so in Last of the Jedi, it was a very different feeling to what we've got here, which is it's still feels quite lived in, but it feels much darker, much more gritty, much more people barely making their way in life. And on the one hand, I do quite enjoy, and I quite enjoy both versions. I take it this is still quite a few levels above, this actual surface. I think they said at one point like they're at level 115 in this chapter. I don't know whether I can't remember whether that's one of the levels Nick Rostu went by or whether it's the level he's on now. I'm trying to look for it. No, I can't find it. But it was again. I'm quite enjoying the descriptions of these levels so far. They're not too descriptive, um, but they're not they're not overly descriptive, but they're also not under descriptive. You're still getting enough description to get a picture of what they are in your head. And that's personally how I prefer books to be, not overly descriptive. Because there are just some times where the book goes on and on about trying to describe something or telling you something, and it's just there's ways you can shorten that down and for it to be much more interesting and much more hooking, easier to stick with the book than just, having a whole paragraph dedicated to telling us how the shoes on a character look. It's and luckily, these chapters didn't go overly in detail, but it was still details enough that you could get a picture of what he was talking about. So yeah, there's really, again, not a whole lot to talk about. It is literally just telling us about Nick Rostu's journey to Amtor Avenue and of course St. Arms. And then we're told to be, and probably the most interesting thing to discuss is him trying to find Jax Pavin once he's at Amtor Avenue. We're told about how he's trying to use the Force, trying to sense Jax. The problem is that he can't sense him. He's not got the, he wasn't trained as a Jedi Padawan. He can't drive, hold a conversation, and still try and search for Jax in the Force. He's not got a Force connection as strong as that. And we're told the strongest one out of the Kawani that he knew was Carvasta, and of course he was deep in the dark side. So yeah. And so he winds up just resorting to asking people about once he can't sense Jax Pavin after trying. And he's eventually able to get a 3PO droid, protocol droids, to tell him where, after giving the description of Jax. They give about like 10. How many people was it? I think it was 10. Was it 10 or 20? Yeah, 10. Of 10 humans who match the description Nick gave of Jax. He makes his way over to the Coruscant Arms, which is, of course, where Jax is. And he's about to cross the street when a troop transport lands. Some stormtroopers come out, and he takes out his blaster and decides that, he has to go in there. It's thinking, oh, found 2 Jedi in 2 days. And he thinks it's unlikely that the stormtroopers are there for anything else. Like, it's possible, but he thinks it's unlikely that they are not looking for the Jedi. He thinks they are looking for the Jedi. And so he takes out his blaster and he starts across the street, and the last couple lines of the chapter is, "No guts, no glory after all. Not that he had anything to prove. Nick knew he had guts. He'd seen them." And that's how it ends. Again, there's not really a whole lot to talk about. We're mainly just told about Nick's journey. This book really is taking its time to just get to the point. I think I think it's been a bit frustrating in a way, just with how long the book's taking, because you still feel like it feels like we're still waiting for the book to actually get to what it's talking about. It's with 7 chapters in out of 40. It still hasn't even properly started the plot yet. It's really taking its time. On the one hand, it's all right. If it wants to take its time. On the other hand, it's doing so much setting up that it's just taking so long to get into the plot. And it really just is. We could be getting into the plot a little bit faster, if it just cut down a bit on the exposition. You can still fit everything it's trying to say into the book. You just don't have to use as many words, And I think the book will probably be better off for that, just because there's so much it's trying to tell you at the moment, and it's stopping itself from really being able to get into the plot of the book. I think, because again, with 7 chapters in, we still haven't really began the plot of the book, nor do we really know what the plot of the book is, really. We know that, again, based on the summary on the back, we know that it's Jax Pavin has been given a quest by Peel that Nick's brought over to Jax, and he has to complete the quest. But we still don't know what the quest is, and we're 7 chapters in. And it is just a bit, I feel at this point we should probably have an idea of where the book's going. We don't, even like in Darth Plagueis, at this point we were about halfway through part 1 in that book. We were already making a lot of progress in the plot, you know. Here it feels like we've only taken about like 2 steps in the plot. Whereas in Plagueis, you know, it feels like we had taken quite a couple hundred steps throughout the plot already. And so I think the book does need to start picking it up soon. I don't think it really helps. So it looks like we're not picking up where we leave off in chapter 8. It looks like we've been introduced to another new character that we're probably going to get some backstory exposition on. Once the book actually starts getting into the plot, I think I will start having a lot more to say, hopefully. But it's just taking so long to get into what it's trying to say, you know, into getting into the plot. And again, I have no problem with just having, you know, the book be more laid back, more just talky. I have no problem with that. I've brought it up. I brought it up on the channel before. I am writing a book, and my book is very much just a lot of the time characters just standing around and talking. I don't have a problem with that. It's just you still need to make it feel like the plot's being moved or have some sort of balance, so the book just isn't for lack of a better word, a bit of a snooze fest. Where it's just you're waiting for something to happen and it's taking so long for stuff to happen. Or, you know, the action just doesn't really last that long. And so far we've had a couple of action scenes in this book. You know, we've had Evan Peel's death. We've had Jax Pavan facing Rocco's thugs, Bully Boys. We've had Zenda facing the ganks, and being rescued by I5. And it seems like now we're going to have some sort of battle between Jax and Nick and the 5 stormtroopers that we're probably not going to get for a little bit now, until like chapter 9, I'd assume, or maybe even later. And it's the combat doesn't last very long either, and I think it's at times it's a little bit. I think the book's still trying to. Yeah, I think it's just the book is just taking a really long time to just get to get to the point. And again, nothing wrong with dragging things out, but you still need to make it feel like the plot is moving. At this point, the plot isn't really moving. I'd still say we're in like, if this was a movie, you know, this would be like this would basically still be like the first 10 minutes where we're finding out what the plot is about, and we still don't know what the plot exactly is about. You know, I only really know because of the on what's on the back. It's only now are we being told what exactly you know, if you didn't read the summary, only now are we being told who is going to take who's going to undertake the quest. But if we still don't even know what the quest is, and it's not really described on the back, I don't think, of the book. So yeah, but overall I did enjoy this chapter. Again, it's not a lot to talk about because again it is literally just Nick going through Coruscant, us being told a little bit of history on, you know, Coruscant itself and some of the culture. It was more interesting this chapter though. You know, all the history and cultural stuff. It was a lot more interesting in this chapter, I think. I don't quite know why. It just was. Again, I can't really narrow down why it felt more interesting. I think it just was, and I think it was because it felt plot appropriate. I think where we're being told about certain points of the journey, and we're having a couple fun facts thrown in there, and they don't drag, and those fun facts don't really drag out either. And I think that's what makes this chapter not just feel less sluggish than other chapters that have than the other chapters in the book so far, which tend to have loads of exposition. So yeah, Again, I don't really have much else to say on this chapter. Again, as I keep saying, it's just Nick going over to the Coruscant Arms. There's nothing to really talk about on this chapter. I'm surprised I've extended this to 15 minutes. So yeah, anyway. I'm going to end this review here because again, I don't really have much else to say. So, thank you all for watching, and goodbye.